Okay, Ro, part three. Time for the grilling. Time for the Q&A. Hope you're ready for this. And if there's any questions that you're not too sure about, just wink and cough, and I'll
no problem. Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is from Orla Summers. First of all, Orla, I hope your biology and your maths is going well, and this is your third subject here in terms of business. What is the best way to approach the ABQ?
Okay, the ABQ, like, what I'd always kind of try and look at it like this is that, like, so basically the way the ABQ works, Dave, is like, I might even show you, just so you remember it from doing it already. Do you remember the ABQ from when you did in school?
I think I got an A1, Ro, but you know.
Did you get an A1?
I actually did, yeah.
Like, that's a sample of an ABQ there, right? So, like, you see, we get like a text here on the about an entrepreneur, something set up business, and then you've got like 3 questions here, and actually that's the one from 2015. So it's enterprise and skills. Then they asked you manager activities, they asked about planning, and then you had a question on how he helps his staff adapt to change, strategy for managing change. So, like, that's on unit 2, that's on unit 3, that's on unit 4. Now, what I would want to note, right, is that, like, you will find, like, when they're basically like, if I was to write an ABQ tomorrow, right? So, like, the way I do it is that, like, I'd write the questions out first, and then I'd write. So what you have to do is you have to basically state the point, back it up then with theory and textbook theory, and then find the relevant quote to that point that you had just stated, right? So, but if I was told to, like, prepare an ABQ, what I do is I prepare the questions first, and then I'd write the quotes out that could be applied to each question. And then I'd write the ABQ around it, if that makes sense. I think a lot of times students are looking at it and saying, oh, they just write out a sample thing on a business, and then they at the end, they give them a few questions, and then you define whatever quotes. No, they've written all the quotes be prepared in advance. You can always see the way the ABQ are structured. Like, they've written the ABQ to build around the quotes, and that's what you should always factor in. So, like even a thing that, like, let's say even a question there might be like, let's say the question there was that was it Orla had there about the how you structure the ABQ. So the first thing there is, like, let's say that first question there about enterprise and skills and characteristics, right? So you'd give the first skill would be something about being them entrepreneurs, the ones that you've seen. The skills and characteristics you can go would be like stuff like the ones I'd use if I was going to the exam would be stuff like them being a risk taker, then being innovative, and then as well being realistic. They're like the 3 that, like, if you look at the marketing schemes from, like, the last 4 ABQs when they've asked that question, like 2015, 14, 2009, and 2005 as well, you'll see those 3 things popping up: realistic, innovative, and risk taker, right? So you'd say something like they're a risk taker, and then you'd say that's your theory, and then who's your man's name here? Martin Hart. You'd say Martin Hart there takes a personal and financial risk. All right. So, like, see the way there, I'd say, like, state the point, you develop it with theory, and then you give a quote. So the first thing there to state the point, I'd say risk taker. Then I'd say Martin Hart took personal financial risk in setting up his business. That's the theory part, personal financial risks. Then the examiner gives some marks there. And then straight away there, when I'm literally doing it, is I'm just looking at, see that there, it says Martin invested a further 50,000 euro into the business. That's him taking a risk. That's him investing his own money into the business. And that's the quote that proves it, that he's a risk taker. Do you get me with that? So that's kind of how you structure the question, right? If you look at any marketing scheme on it, it'll always be state the point, you back it up with theory, and then you give a quote that was relevant to that point you'd stated. And what I would want to stress is that, like, you might look in your book, right? You might see, a student might see, like, I don't know, 10, like what I said earlier about, like, I honestly haven't looked at the books in ages, but, like, they might see about 10 or 12 skills and characteristics of an entrepreneur. You've no guarantee that all those skills are going to be in that ABQ. So you have to fish through the ABQ and spot the types of skills that entrepreneur has displayed. So you might say, oh, my book said they've got self-belief, but if there isn't evidence of them having self-belief in the text, then you're not going to get any marks for it. Does that make sense? But that echoes back to the point that I was saying in the previous video. It's like, double up with this and give extra points in your question. So the question there, I think, wanted 3 points or maybe wanted 4, but just you structure it out and give the examiner 5. And then when you've got the 5, like what I've said, and even on the video we have on our school website, there's like it's like 5 of the skills and characteristics, and it's like risk-taking, innovative, realistic, networking, and self-belief / confidence. Those 5 that I've put up, if you look over any past paper, you'll have always seen at least 4 out of those 5 traits popping up in your ABQ marking scheme. So they'd be the safest to go, because like I kind of dig through all the marking schemes in this and trying to make sure they're the 5 that I'd be leaning into to try and make sure I knew inside out. And you then have to be able to spot the quotes. Like the quotes are hard to find though, Dave. Like the one there you have there about, like, let's say, innovative, right? That's one that's, you know, if you look over any question, there's always an example of the entrepreneur being innovative or them taking risk. But yet the way you find it is usually, I'd be looking out for words like, if they ever come up with an idea, a lot of times there's going to be like a source of the idea. It can also show, so like I'd be looking out for like a source of inspiration. So one time it was like, he noticed the popularity of like Irish dance worldwide or something like river dance. But you see the way there's a source, it was like river dance, and that was his source of inspiration. That was the source of him being creative. Or another one might be his solution. If you want to mark in there, another word be the solution. That's another example of them being innovative and creative. Stuff like problem solving. So like you mark, that's, you kind of want, they might say his solution was based on, and then you'd say like, right, that's an example of him being creative. He came up with a solution to a problem, and that's the way you find that quote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So that's what I'd be looking out for. If you're trying to find the example and being innovative, a lot of time there's like one other year, I think it was like 2014. It was like, he read an article about the size of the waves on the coast of Donegal or something like that. And in National Geographic, you see the way there's a source, it was National Geographic, and that was the source of his innovation, and that was his idea for that question. It does take a lot of practice, and unfortunately there's no shortcuts through it, but the ones that I will be trying to stress to my students to drill in will be those 5 that I mentioned, and they're on the video that we put up in our school already anyway. It's on the school page, The Entrepreneur, they can find it there.
Perfect. The next one is actually about the ABQ, and even it's kind of similar. And I think you might have answered a small few things there on it, but just to fully decipher for this girl here. So it's Kira McNally says she always seems to be losing marks in the ABQ, even though she has the right information. So I assume the question is, what's going on?
You know, that could be a couple of things. The first thing could have been is that what might have happened there. Do you remember I said about the skills of the characteristics of an entrepreneur? Maybe she was putting in points that weren't actually on the text. Does that make sense? So like if she'd have said, let's say, mention a point on, let's say the entrepreneur had like self-belief, but there was no evidence of that in the text, she might have lost the marks there on that. The other thing as well, though, it might have been like even in 2016, they asked you what type of leadership style. Yeah, it was like they asked you in 2016, they asked you to discuss the management skills. And 3 management skills are leading, motivating, communicating, right? And when you're referring to leadership, you might want to refer to the type of leadership style they have. There's 3 types of leadership styles: democratic, autocratic, or laissez-faire. But you have to be able to read through the text and spot which one of the 3 that entrepreneur is. So imagine if they weren't in any way autocratic, but you mentioned autocratic as your point, you won't get the marks because it wasn't relevant to that part of the text. You have to be able to read through the text and sort of maybe spot what theory do they want to see. The only other little thing I would say on that is double up with the thing. And if you think the question's looking for 3 points, give the examiner 4 or 5 and let them take your best 3. And that's a little way of ensuring you against a tougher marking scheme and stuff like that. Within that though, going back to the ABQ, like it does, like a lot of it boils down to just a bit of practice. Like the skills and characteristics question that I was talking about earlier there, that's been 7 times out of 9 years. So if you're able to say to a student, like, let's even go through, this might be a bit of a longer answer on the ABQ, but I think it's important that, like, let's say if you're to go through their skills and characteristics, they've always wanted innovative. So if you remember I said earlier about when you find the quote, let's say explain innovation, right? And, you know, the ability to think outside the box and stuff like that. But like, that's like the theory they want with it, right? So like, when you find the quote for innovate, there's a lot of time there's a source of inspiration. They could be creative. They come up with a new idea, or it could be problem solving. That's, you know, so you're reading through, you see it like that. That's the example of the innovation. If you're looking for risk taking, it's an example of personal financial risk. It could be something like they put their own money into a business, or it might be something like they quit their job to start a company. Do you get that? So like, that's another example of you proving that they're a risk taker. And then the other one, then realistic, would be another one they've seen. Like, look at the marking schemes on it. Like, they look over the marking scheme from the last 4 years, they'll always see realistic. And realistic is And the quote on it is always so straightforward. It's literally just, if they look at like 2015, 14, literally was, he realized. Do you get me? So that's all the quote was. When you see the word realized, like that's the quote that proves that he's realistic. So if they kind of chip away those things enough, they'll be able to dig them out. But that's what I would like with the unit 2. I'd be looking out for like the skills and characteristics of an entrepreneur, and then they could ask us about the benefits of being an entrepreneur and entrepreneurship. But that's kind of what they'd be looking for in those. The only one, like the other question there on it, if she was going into like why she loses marks, they're I suppose the only really main reasons. I'll go through 3 and 4 later on. I suppose we're going down through it, but that's what I'd be looking out for in that.
Yeah. I think we're going to get a little bit more into this towards the end, but this person here says, well, we have ABQ tips, so you just gave some, but that was Saoirse Woods, but Zoe Grant says the most likely questions for this year's ABQ. Do you want to
yeah. So
leave that, or do you want to talk about it now?
No, I can drill into it now. Like what you would see, right? So units 2, 3, and 4, right? So what you would see in units 2, I'd be looking out for the skills and characteristics of the entrepreneur, the benefits of being an entrepreneur. And like, I remember that was never asked before in the Leaving Cert, right? And like, I was just drilling that into my 6 years last year because it came up as a short question in 2018. And then they threw it in the long question in 2019. So they can ask the benefits of being an entrepreneur. They could also ask you about entrepreneurship, like they did in 2010 on the ABQ. And they asked you then within that word the benefits of entrepreneurship. So they're the main ones for Unit 2. Look out for maybe Unit 2 as well, the drawbacks of being an entrepreneur. They've never asked before, but of course, if they're asking the benefits, that opens the door for them to ask them the drawbacks as well of being an entrepreneur. Okay, so the drawbacks of starting your own business, the stress, the workload involved, the cash flow at the start, anything like that. You'd be able to spot, I suppose, from the ABQ, but just don't let that throw you off. Came up. Unit 3, the question pretty much, remember I said earlier, it's either been managing skills or managing activities. 3 times out of 12 years of skills, and 9 times out of 12 years those activities. One little thing I'd be looking out for within the management activities, especially control. Don't go into your Leaving Cert this year without being very, very competent on control, because the question on control in the business as part of the management activities hasn't come up since 2014. I think it's come up 2 or 3 times as a separate question. So they've asked you a question like management control on its own. So just I'd be looking out for that. And then so units 2 and 3 are quite structured, and then unit 4 is a bit all over the place, right? So like for unit 4, it would be like stuff like HRM. But even if that doesn't come up in the ABQ, they've got a large chance that they'll see that question as a long question anyway, because it's quite large, quite a big part, but it comes up on most papers. So HRM, you have to know that. I'm kind of going through the chapters in my head. The strategies for managing change. That's one that's come up 3 times out of 12 years on Unit 4, the strategies for managing change. And the way I remember that is it's like in my head, it's like Luke really can't take penalties. So you kind of remember them. The L is for, so like if you want to get your workers to adapt to change, you lead by example. The R, rewards, and also you provide them with resources. Can't like communicate how they benefit from the change. Look, I'll go through it, that's kind of just getting sucked into it too much, but I'd look out for that. You can get it all the marking schemes up. That came up in 2015. Then so the HRM, strategy for managing change, they one really, and then one other really important one. This is there's 6 overall, right? But the third one then would be on finance, right? And they asked this in 2012 and in 2016. They asked like the source of finance. You had to have like short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And that's just really like you to kind of practice over those questions. But once you know them, there's nothing really that's too hard there. Now these are the ones that haven't come up, but they could throw out at you, right? I'd make sure I knew insurance and tax very, very well for the ABQ this year. A question came up in like 2007 on insurance, but it hasn't come up. It hasn't come up since then. So I'd make sure I covered insurance very, very well, and that could be like what are different types of insurance that business has to have. So you might read through it. You might see things like they've got cars, motor insurance, and you can just read if they have a premises. You can see that there. It's like public liability insurance. You have to be able to read through and spot that there. And then also the different types of tax. I just look out for insurance and tax as well as the ABQ question. And is there anything else then that I could be missing on that? No, I think they're all the main ones ticked off. So HRM, strategies for managing change, insurance, tax, and the source of finance. They're the big ones to make sure that they've got covered well.
There's actually a good few on ABQs that I think you've actually answered every single one of them. But just to give just give a one last look through here just to see if there's anything else. So Aisling Shield says how to do ABQs. You've discovered that there, or you've told us that there. Cameron Kelly asks your tips, what you think will come up. You've just spoken about that there. And they're all the other ABQ questions are actually. Well, Dara Ryan says ABQs, how to strict them, but I think you mean structure, and you explain how to structure them there.
Yeah, like I don't mind kind of going through it again. One little quick thing to structure the ABQ is like you state the point, remember you develop it, and then you dig out the quote. But well, they might ask you to also evaluate it, and you have to give an extra bit of information on that question, and more insight in it. Were they good or management skills? Or they might ask you, like, you might have to give insight into why were they effective as a manager within their roles. So you maybe spot something they've done right or something they could have done better and like that. But one little thing I would say as well, the evaluation. Sometimes in the ABQ, students might get sucked into it too much. So like, I'll give an example of it, but there's 1 year evaluation came up as an ABQ question, but it was only worth 2 marks out of the 80. And that was like 0.5% of their overall Leaving Cert grade. And maybe it was 3, okay, but either way, it's less than 1%, right? But students wrote tons on it. And then they lost time elsewhere. So just structure that. But like what they will see, if they dig out any marking scheme, they'll see it's always the points in the ABQ. They might see something for 7 marks, it might be broken down 3, 2, and 2. And that state the point 3 marks, develop on it 2 marks, and give the quote, that's their 2 marks there. But that's the thing. One tiny little thing I would want to stress though is that, like, last thing on the Unit 4, you know the way I gave the predictions there for Unit 4? If I was going to my Leaving Cert in June, I wouldn't be like, okay, I'd write down those 5 predictions and gamble on them coming up. You can't afford to gamble in the ABQ. If it doesn't, imagine, like, no one knows what way it's going to come up. Obviously, none of the teachers know. So they could easily see questions on like total quality management that they haven't covered. So they have to be very, very careful. I'd just be ruthless and I'd cover all of Unit 4 inside out. I wouldn't be leaving anything to chance on those parts of the paper.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can gamble on Unit 6 and 7, or you can gamble on the units outside the ABQ, but really drill those 3 units inside out.
I like this question here. It says, there's one more thing on it. It says, can a tax calculation or ratio come up as part of an ABQ?
It's unlikely, but there's nothing stopping it from coming up. So like, it's unlike, that the tax question, right? I think that's very unlikely, because the tax question, you might have to calculate somebody's take-home pay. The ABQ, you'll see, is basically based on entrepreneurs who've set up their own business. So you wouldn't be calculating their own take-home pay. It'd be unlikely that they get that, So I wouldn't expect. Being honest, I'd be stunned if it came up. But then again, and I couldn't blame, if someone wants to leave out the tax question, I could understand why, because it came up in 2018. If you're aiming for H1 though, you can't really afford to take those risks. But my genuine answer is I'd be very surprised if they asked the question. They can ask it though, but I'd be very surprised if they did.
Vicky asks, how do you get a H1? But there's also, just because I think you could answer this in the same sort of question, there's also a question from Ruth Farrell who says, how to go from a H3 to a H2. So what really distinguishes students, basically, I think, is the overall idea there.
Yeah, well, they're actually kind of two different. It sounds kind of similar, but there actually won't be. The differences and all those things, actually, they're kind of 2 different questions. So let's say the one for how to go from, like, let's say H3 to H2. If you're looking at that, it really is just making sure, it depends on where they're wrong. You want to be able to spot, first off, where your weakness is. You want to see, right, am I bad at time management? Am I bad at, do I not know the course well enough? And a good thing would always be to look over your mock and see where you drop marks and see if there's elements you can improve on. But like, if you're aiming for H2, it is quite doable once you put in enough work and you push yourself very hard in it. But like, if you're aiming for H2, you could afford maybe to leave out. You could get away with, being honest, I'd say you get away with leaving out a full unit. You could literally not look at one unit if you wanted to. You could leave out, let's say, unit 7. But if you're going to make that decision, right, where are you a bit short? Imagine if you said, right, I'm going to go into my Leaving Cert this year, and I bet, has anyone else asked that question? Can you leave out unit 6 and 7?
Yeah, a couple of people there. And then there's also one thing about it. It says, Jess Whelan said, do correctors grade easier when you answer unit 6 and 7 because they're not answered as often?
Okay, not really. I wouldn't look into that now. They wouldn't just not really. Yeah, I wouldn't. I'd see why you'd ask that, but just it's not mainly what you want to spot there. Sorry, Jess, with that question is like, remember I said earlier about unit 5 being the marketing questions, one that's quite poorly answered because students would tend to go for that a lot of time. That's just one maybe to look out for. But it really, but just don't overthink that part. On the daily exam, whatever 4 questions you're most confident with, just drill into them. Going back in this question here, though, just want to show you one little thing here, guys, right? Is that like, remember this thing about the units? Let's say, can you guys see that thing well enough there?
Yep.
Yeah. So you know the way I was saying there about, like, let's say if you're deciding, right, I'm going to leave out unit 7, right? So you're going to leave that out. You're still quite well set up because on part 1, then you can do units 1 and 6, right? The only place you're a little bit exposed here is on the short questions, right? So if you're a student going into the exam and you're thinking of leaving out unit 7, what I would do is I'd stress to make sure I covered a question. There's a few topics you want to make sure you practice on unit 7 because for the short questions, even if you're leaving it as a long question. But I'd make sure I wrote down there the balance of trade question. So if they want to mark it in there, like the balance of trade / balance of payments, the decision-making process of the European Union. So they can put in 2 points about like the European Commission, the European Parliament, the Council of the EU, the difference between like a directive and a regulation. If they study that, right, and then if they also study trade, stuff like free trade, protectionism, if they study those 3 parts of the course, right, and then one last thing as well, to look at global business, just the definition on that. That is pretty much 95% of the short questions they've ever asked on Unit 7. Does that make sense? Yeah. Imagine you're going to the exam and you see where we're a bit weak was on Section A there because you could see 2 short questions in Unit 7. Well, then play the odds and be like, right, well, I'm going to leave out Unit 7, but I'm going to pick out these little parts of Unit 7, practice them. That way, if they come up with a short question, I can still get a very, very high grade. And one thing I'd make sure, remember the first one I said about balance trade and balance payments, like that came up in 2018 and 2016. You know, it's just one, as short questions, they're ones I'd want to make sure I knew really, really well.
Perfect.
One last thing on that, I think that's come up like 8 times in the last 10 years as a short question. Though, you see, remember those 4 things I mentioned there?
Yeah.
So that's chances are that's going to be worth 2.5% of our paper in June. If they sit, or sorry, in whenever August or whatever it'll be.
That's 2025.
Yeah. So that's if you're aiming for H2s, that's what I'd be trying to do. But going back to the little thing about the H2s, it just I suppose you just want to make sure you're consistent across the board and you've got your units 1 to 5 quite well. Cover unit 6 a bit if you want, but that's the main things there on that. Get the basic bits of the theory right and make sure you understand, illustrate, discuss, and all that sort of stuff as well. That you can get them done. Watch your time management, you should be fine. And then the last little quick thing on the student about aim for H1. The H1s are so hard. So like to get a H1, you really want to make sure you've got a lot of things tied down. You want to make sure you know the course so well. You can write out so fast. You're not even really thinking about the content on it. Like you're not pausing really much in the exam. You really want to make sure you know it really, really well. So you can get the questions, the papers done on time. You want to make sure it's very, very hard with the H1s. You want to make sure as well, the whole thing about if the question comes up for 20 marks, you want to make sure, and you think they want 4 points, you want to get into the habit of giving them 5 or 6, give them extra points, take advantage of the marking scheme. And then you really want to be digging around the unlikely questions that are kind of like curveballs so that they throw out every year. Like something like maybe the role of advertising and sales promotion, those sort of random questions that come up once every 10 years. But when they do come up, they cause big problems. You just have to make sure you know those little things inside out as well. So you can't, if you're aiming for H2s or, lower, if you're aiming for H1s, you can't take any risks. You have to make sure you dig through the whole course and make sure you've got all those questions covered very, very well.
You actually mentioned this next one on the last podcast. However, just in case people skip directly to this one, I think it's definitely worthwhile answering this again. So there's 2 similar questions here. One from I'm sorry if I don't pronounce this right, Trisha 12, how to actually study business and remember the information. And then one from Heather Dolan saying how to study. So I think I really enjoyed your answer in the last podcast about this, but what was your advice on that?
Kind of similar, the similar stuff there, really trying to don't, like, once you're confident you know the content and you've read the book and you've read the notes and you're like, right, I understand that point, simulate the exam scenario, turn the thing upside down, try and write the heading or the statement the point, and then to make sure you can mark in the key words when you're developing on it. You don't need to write the full sentences, loads or anything like that, because there's so many different questions. There's hundreds of questions to cover for the course. So I'd be studying faster with it. I'd be like, right, state the point, make sure I've got the theory and the leaving cert. You can build those into paragraphs. And I just get into the habit of that. And then remember I said about the pink pen or whatever, any points you ever miss in your studying or putting your ask those questions, make sure you mark them in. That's what I'd be trying to do. Then when you're studying, if you ever do end up practicing past questions, make sure you just get into the habit of doing it within the allotted time. That's just the big one to look out for. And of course, guys, you've got a bit of time to practice on these ABQs. So I'd make sure you go through all those types of ABQ past questions and stuff like that. And you get used to doing them within 40 minutes. So you're not cut out for time management. It's very, very important for anybody aiming for H2, H3 or H1 or whatever. You can get that ABQ done in the 40 minutes.
For Jordan O'Connor here, could you actually run through, you did it already, just if the exam started at 9:30, when you would advise your students to be finished each section again?
No, do you know what it is? We did a video on this already with the school. It's like, I think it's like Leaving Cert Business time management advice. And I'd say if they even fired that into YouTube, you could get it, because it could end up talking about that for about 10 minutes. And it's much more clear because it's on a board and it's laid out, and they can pause the screen and write the thing out. I just make sure to like on the day of the exam, if what I'd be advising to do, like imagine if you've got your paper here, I'd be saying stuff like finish this section by 9:35, finish this section by 10:05, finish this section by 10:45. Do you get me though? You're writing like ABQ, finished ABQ by 10:45, and then you're looking up the clock. Don't be writing stuff like 40 minutes, because then the exam could be adding up what time they started, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So on the right time, what time you're finished, and the start exam, you're marking out what questions you're doing, marking in the questions you are. But that it's all kind of covered in that video. But I'd be really stressing to fire into that, and you'll have it all there.
Good time investment to look into that, I suggest. Rory Chuk is saying here how to get a H2, but this is the more important part. It says goal setting for business. Example, would you study Unit 5 thoroughly for the week? So what would your goal setting advice be in terms of
definitely. I'd study it in the way the paper's laid out. So like going back to that, remember I was saying study units 2 and 3 together, because chances are you see that's a full question on 4. But it's the right idea. Just look out for that, Rory, with that. Is that like I'd be trying to spot there that like if you don't mind, I'll show you up here again, right? Now this just how they put the paper out in 2015, right? But see the way there, that question 5 was on Unit 5, question 6 was on Unit 4, and question 7 is on Unit 5. They could mix that up, and you might see a mixture of Unit 5 and 4 there together. So if you're studying, I'd be making sure to study sort of I'd be breaking, because it's so long, I'd be breaking them into parts, but I'd be also factoring into the exam. And I'd be trying to say to myself, right, there's a good chance I could see a full question or half a question in Unit 4 and half a question in Unit 5 within the same long question, if that makes sense. So when you're studying, yeah, it's definitely the best move. Break the units down into weeks, but just factor in the length of each unit and make sure you remember, obviously, that some are way longer than others. If you're starting off studying, drill into units 2 and 3 first, because chances are that's going to be about 33% of your paper. Remember I showed earlier how that's laid out. Then maybe move on to Unit 4. Unit 4, though, remember I was saying earlier about 2, 3, and 4, just be ruthless on them. And don't put yourself under pressures, and don't be rushing to get done with that. And if students turned around to me and said, I've spent, imagine between now and the Leaving Cert or whatever, and students said they're halfway through studying and they've only done units 2, 3, and 4. That's an insanely good position to be in. Do you get me? If you've only done, let's say, imagine you've 10 weeks to your Leaving Cert, right? And after 5 weeks, units 2, 3, and 4 inside out. That's although you've only covered 3 units out of the 7, it's still a brilliant position to be in, because if you're looking at how that falls in your Leaving Cert, chances are they're going to be covered for around 60% of their paper, just by knowing units 2, 3, and 4. So that's what I'd be doing. Then move on to unit 5. Then when you're confident that, you move on to units 1, 6, and 7. And then you know as well where you stand. Like if you're coming out from the Leaving Cert, you're coming out, let's say a couple of weeks from the Leaving Cert, and you're like, right, I have a lot of work to do to cover up. I don't know what to do now in terms of like units 1, 6, and 7. If you find you want to invest more time into units 2, 6, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can cut unit 7, you can cut unit 6, and focus mainly only on unit 1. Do you get me? But like, so what I'd be doing now, I drill units 2 to 5. When you know that inside out, then start to look at units 1, 6, and 7. Because I even got that email from like 4 of my students since the schools were closed. They were like, should I study unit 7? And I basically copy and paste the same answer back to all of them. I was like, ignore all that stuff for now. Nail units 2 to 5. Then when you see where you are in a month's time, with units 2 to 5, then work on the pick between 1, 6, and 7.
How, sorry, I just got lost there.
No, yeah.
Oh, it says, how do you know how much to write for each long question? From Siobhan Cronin.
If it boils down to, with the long questions, it boils down to, remember I was saying about the time management. So like you get a question, comes up for 25 marks, let's say, divided by 2.5, and you have 10 minutes. So the way I'd be looking at that in my head, I'd be like, right, I'd be saying to myself, I have 10 minutes to write this answer to the best standard possible. So like in theory, you'd want to write, obviously be writing as much as you can, but you have to get it done within the allotted time. So the first thing you want to do is spot how long you have. Then when you say like, right, I've got 10 minutes to do it, then you want to obviously do it the best standard as possible within the 10 minutes. But it's not always that straightforward, because they might have broken the question into 2 parts. And let's say you get a 25 mark question, it's broken into 2 parts. What I'd be doing there is I'd be assuming there's nearly 15 marks going for part 1 and 15 going for part 2. So you want to assume the worst case scenario. You don't know if it's going to be 10 and 15 or 15 and 10. Do you get me? Mm-hmm. On the way the paper is falling. So you want to be saying to yourself, right, if they want part 1 is for 15 marks, part 2 is for 15 marks, and then 15 divided by 5, 3 points in each one. Then you put down your 3 points for each of those questions. Okay, so and within that, then you state the point. You're like stating it, or like identifying the point, and then you're developing on it. And when you're developing on it, you want to make sure you develop on it with your textbook knowledge, and throw in another bit of information if you can. It boils down to really how fast you are at writing as well. You want to make sure you can try and develop in each point you make with about two bits of textbook theory at least. That'll ensure you get your full marks on the question. One little bad habit I've found students doing as well is that, like, sometimes you might see in students, is that they think they have to give an example after every single point they make in the exam. That can be really, really detrimental for your time management. My advice on that would be only give examples if they're asking for it. So only give examples as the question says, explain using example or illustrate. Otherwise, you could be writing in these examples that aren't going to get you any marks in your paper.
Perfect.
And make sure that if you're giving examples, they have to be fully explained. Like they ask you for an example of an entrepreneur, you can't just write Bill Gates. It has to be fully explained. Bill Gates founded Microsoft, and you have to mention the entrepreneur in their name. But anytime you're giving examples, fully explained examples.
So one last question. It was actually, he's gotten to the point here. There was a few of them, but I like this one the best. It was from Ben Clark, and he literally just said, no question mark or nothing, just said predictions.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, he's the right idea though. Like, that's the main thing, predictions. Yeah, like the one thing, like, and it's trickier too, because like if I was in a class, I'd be whacking out predictions all the time. But like obviously with this, it's it's on video or whatever. You're like trying to be a bit more careful or whatever. But like, I just want to always stress, if you're giving predictions, like you just don't know, like, don't know how they're going to fall. Like, so, you don't know
how. We call them to cover ourselves in maths. And realistically, most of them do hit, but there's the odd student that only looks at that. And we always stress, even in maths or even in biology, make sure you study everything else. And then towards the end, put your focus on that. If you want a good grade, put your focus on that. So we call them likely questions.
But even on that, yeah, exactly. And then the other simple thing is like, I'd answer it as honest as I can and say, right, if I was going to my Leaving Cert, this is what I'd do. You can take my advice or not, and that's I suppose, like, you're dead right. Like, that's exactly what I'd be doing if I was told I could have one question. I'd be like, yeah, just tell me the predictions. Do you want to fire through them? Yeah, so
fire through them, boss.
Now, these are off the top of my head, and but it was funny because like I knew obviously you were saying you'd fire the questions, but I knew I was like, I'd say I knew straight away they're gonna want predictions, obviously. So, unit one, just look out for interest groups and make sure you mark in there, like they might say illustrate the role of interest groups, and if that came up as unit one's a long question because it came up in like 2014. 2009, 2003, and you can see that's been every 5 or 6 years, and we haven't seen it since 2014. So look out for it though, because when it's interest groups, it's like illustrate the role of interest groups. And every time, if you look at those 3 questions, 2003, 2009, 2014, on interest groups, it's always been the same thing. They wanted you to give the role using examples of interest groups. So you have to be careful there. Like, it's not just give a definition and you're fine. You have to explain their role, like how they operate in business and how they impact business, like stuff like what they do with lobbying, how they pressure the government, how they organize petitions, boycotts. But what I do, and then back them up with examples like, IFA, the Irish Farm Association, explain what they do, ASTI, stuff like that. But just make sure you've got that question tied down. Very worthwhile, even just if you I don't know if you have my book around, obviously, but it's drilled into my book and that stuff. But even whatever book you're using off, you don't have, if it's not covered maybe in your book around, the marketing scheme will 2014, that'll cover that. And one other one again is discrimination, the Employment Equality Act. I'd look out for that, and it could be like outline the role of the WRC in investigating discrimination. Just another one I'd look out for. Mainly as well, the WRC, the Workplace Relations Commission. You could see that popping up, and it's going to be one that will cause problems with students because it's new in the course. So just make sure you've got that. The adjudication officer, mediation, stuff like that. Make sure you know that quite well. Especially with discrimination, make sure they've got the definition right as well. Like you can't say this when you treat people differently. It has to be less favorably. So if you're treating one worker less favorably compared to another, they won't accept it if you say, discrimination is when you treat one worker different compared to another. So just look out for that in unit one. Unit 2, we've drilled. Unit 2 is all the ABQ stuff. Remember kind of going through units 2, 3, and 4. Being honest with that, like there's nothing new there in that. Units 2, 3, and 4, we've gone through the ABQs, and then even you might see in the ABQ, you might see it as a long question. You literally need to know units 2 and 3 inside out. Like my prediction will be on units 2 and 3 is it's going to come up as about 30% your paper. You probably see it as short question, two ABQ questions, and a long question that adds up to 120 marks. That's 30% your grade there. So like that's what my prediction there, and that would be to just drill that part of the course inside out. Unit 4, and don't leave anything out on units 2 and 3. One to maybe look out for, and if it does come up, it'll also just on the unit 3 thing, which would cause a lot of problems for students, is if they asked you what are the benefits and drawbacks of a functional organizational structure. And if you look at the paper from 2010 and if you look at the paper from 2015, you saw that exact question. Think about it, 5 years, came up 2010, came up like similar questions came up in like 2004 and 2002 and stuff, but just organization structure, the benefits and drawbacks of a functional organizational structure. Refer to things like the chain of command, specialization. They'll know it when they look that up. But yeah, that's the main things there. And then within that as well, just don't go into leaving without knowing control inside out, stock control, quality control, credit control, financial control. Drill that inside out as well. Make sure you've got that tied down very well. On that then with the unit 4, we've done all that.
I don't want to rush you or anything, but this is going to knock us off in a couple of minutes.
Right, and just unit 4, then I'd say just the debt equity ratio, make sure they have that, and then on that the cash flow forecast, okay, and maybe look out for as well cash flow forecast, the limitations of the cash flow forecast. Just tell them to forecast your predictions of the weather, so stuff like cash flow forecast limitations. That would be like, look, imagine with any business now with COVID-19, you couldn't have predicted how that would have affected your revenue and stuff. So the cash flow forecast limitations of that, it's not covered in the book or anything. Like, you probably, not covered in a book, and it's not covered in a lot of books, I wouldn't say, because they've never asked it in the Leaving Cert, but I think they could see that pop up as a question. And make sure as well insurance and tax for the ABQ thing as well there. Then unit 5 is so long. Stuff like the role of advertising, maybe it hasn't come up a long time, just so it'll cause problems if it does come up. And then within unit 5, the challenges of starting a new business. Just make sure you look out for that. And then also unit 5, sales promotion, make sure you've got that covered as well. Franchising And we've done a video on that, how business franchising appears to come up every second year for the last 10 years, didn't come up last year. Unit 6 then, I'd say the employment, interest rates is an important one for Unit 6. And then also on Unit 6 as well there, business ethics maybe, and also social responsibility. And then Unit 7, just the decision-making process, the balance of trade, and the protectionism, free trade, and the barriers to trade for Unit 7. That's what I'd be drilling through if I was in your position. If I was doing my leaving cert, that's what I'd be making sure I covered. Again, very unpredictable paper though, very hard to predict. So that's just what I'd make sure though I'd chip away then. And if like, you know, a third of them came up or whatever, I'd be, you know, very happy. It's a very, very hard paper to predict. Yeah. Debt equity ratio though, on that note, just make sure you know that well. Debt equity ratio.
There's some nice stuff for the students to focus on anyway, and nice things for them to look at. So it's that's always, it's my phone. Sorry, it's always welcomed. I suggest from them.
One last thing I would say in the predictions as well is that like they're all the things, everything we've gone through is when I was doing my Easter courses. They're literally everything I covered in Easter courses, because like you're able to pause the video every time and prep the board. I literally hammered through all of that at Easter. My honest advice is just drill Easter as well. If you're rusty in that, you'll get all the notes, and I go through all those questions in the Easter course.
Yeah, well, unbelievable. I actually saw your Easter course, mate. It was absolutely fantastic. You're a model citizen. You're a model citizen, giving up your time to do this for us. 3 different separate podcasts on this, and committing forward, and obviously you put a good bit of energy and effort into the different stuff. So thanks so much, Ro. Really appreciate it.
It's great to see it properly as well. Like, so just, you know. Yeah,
it's unreal. This is what I look like outside. It's good. I'm not wearing a black t-shirt, but I'm wearing a black hoodie. So it's all right, Ro. Thanks so much for this, and sure we'll be chatting to you soon for the Irish and the economics, and look forward to that.
Great stuff. Thanks,
Ro. Thanks.